Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your time today. My name is Luke Webster. I'd like to take a slightly different tack in talking about open literacy and talk about three things today. First of all, the incredible aspirational and educational power possible within modern commercial transmedia stories, such as Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Secondly, the evolution of fundamental storytelling structure in our modern digital age. And thirdly, the opportunities and responsibilities for corporations, storytellers, and individuals to understand these structures and improve civic ties and the civic imagination to create a brighter future. But firstly, our story begins a short time ago on a social media platform close by, when two prominent storytellers from the two largest commercial entertainment franchises in Western culture lost their jobs. James Gunn, the writer and director behind the Guardians of the Galaxy films, which were, in his own words, a story about adults who were abused as children starting to heal by building relationships with other adults who were abused as children. And Chuck Wendig, author behind a number of Star Wars comics and, more importantly, a series of novels in which he introduced the first major LGBTIQ hero in the new Star Wars canon. Both storytellers ran into trouble professionally when they used social media to speak out individually in an aggressive way against the Trump government, which attracted the attention and criticism of right-wing personalities. In Gunn's case, right-wing trolls resurfaced some of his old, highly offensive tweets in which he casually made fun of serious issues like rape and pedophilia, and Disney chose to fire him. In Wendig's case, the vulgarity of his tweets led to his editor at Marvel choosing to fire him too. The irony here is that the commercial stories they're both well known for telling focus on social inclusion and negotiating and overcoming differences to work together. Yet in their personal communications, regardless of your political stance, they were divisive in their approach. Part of what makes this complex is the issue that both storytellers' online identities had become blurred with their role as custodians of the Marvel and Star Wars story worlds. Social media has become a site of play within modern entertainment, for storytellers and for fans alike. For instance, in these three examples here, we can see fans engaging with James Gunn, Brie Larson and Natalie Portman playing with their fictional identities, and Ryan Reynolds cheekily popping his Deadpool into the MCU through paratext. But such communication is also open to misinterpretation. And there's no guarantee that these elements of communication will be received by audiences in the manner in which they were intended. So at the same time, social media can be a complex corporate environment to navigate, and we should question whether these sorts of exchanges are truly participative or more strategically interactive and performative on the part of the company. As Richard Caldwell explains, corporations use social media strategically to hype blockbusters, and the seemingly transparent view behind the scenes of a Hollywood production can be a calculated way to grow fan loyalty and to leverage free labour produced through fan engagement. So we could instead see here also James Gunn reasserting his further control over his corner of the MCU, Brie Larson and Natalie Portman building hype for their next MCU films, and Ryan Reynolds leveraging the achievements of the MCU to boost the profile of his mutant character. So although it's likely that these examples are a fusion of both personal and corporate motivations, it can be difficult to tell where human agency ends and corporate control begins in these kinds of communications. Nevertheless, individuals will remix the signs and symbols from commercial entertainment to tell their own stories, and we see communities forming around aspirational ideas, such as the feminist philosophy behind Kelly Sue DeConnick's rebooted Captain Marvel, and the shipping of Captain Marvel and Valkyrie following certain MCU films, or fans pushing for greater gender diversity to be represented and recognised across all platforms of a story. This is an important part of us developing our civic imagination and extending the vision around what our future culture could look like, and therefore this process of play can have significant positive implications. Transmedia producer Jeff Gomez argues that there is a commercial opportunity for corporations who are willing to listen and act on this participative feedback or create greater opportunities to encourage such sorts of fan dialogue. And we see instances of fans and storytellers using signs and symbols from commercial entertainment and linking it to real-world action. As Henry Jenkins points out, popular commercial stories work in a similar way as biblical narratives and great morality tales of the past. in that our modern culture can look to popular entertainment to find guidance around issues of how to manage power and responsibility. Therefore, it's important that corporations and storytellers realise the educational potential of these large-scale stories and treat these symbols with care to nurture instances when they may grow to represent a greater cultural meaning. But let's take a step back to place these examples within the changing paradigm of our modern culture. From a semiotic point of view, we can consider storytelling to be a subset of our broader cultural communications. All communications are a part of our continuous cultural efforts to describe and understand our lived experience. And after significant events such as the advent of the internet, our culture goes through a deep period of self-analysis to understand our changed reality. And we carry these learnings forward through time and culture through our use of repetition. This process is fundamentally an educational one for all members of our culture. However, it has been pointed out by John Hartley that in the midst of our digital culture, there has been a greater focus on self-expression than self-analysis, arguably upsetting the semiotic cultural flow. So if we go back to our first two examples of Gunn and Wendig, we can see that this possibly still seems to be the case, but perhaps we can also consider their public firing an instance of us entering a period of semiotic course correction. When we look at how our storytelling formats are changing too, the rich field of transmedia studies tells us that stories are increasingly being told in transmedial fashion, faster than historically possible. And while much of the early debate in the field centred on the idea of stories being able to expand across platforms, it's important for us to remember that at the core of this process is the ability for an idea to be repeated across different platforms, with each medium extending that message. So it performs a semiotic function of reinforcing an important educational message. Stories that are most likely to spread transmedially, from a production point of view, need an aspirational quality, or in other words, they need heart. They need to connect with the aspirational needs of a culture at the right time when needed, like Superman in World War I or Captain America in World War II. And thirdly, they need to allow us to imagine things fancifully and without limitation of the real, beyond the restrictions of our lived realities, similar to how Star Trek provided an aspirational template for racial harmony. Or to quote Henry again, to move beyond the tyranny of the possible, we need to embrace the civic imagination. So, from this perspective, we can see that Gunn and Wendig's personal messages not only missed an opportunity to add to the aspirational quality of their tales, but it also functionally did not correlate with the entertainment narrative within which they were operating. From a mythological point of view, Joseph Campbell formulated the monomyth through his extensive research into recurring patterns in myths across cultures and throughout the ages. From his perspective, the purpose of story is shown to be an educational tool that helps ensure the survival of a tribe and passes down information to the next generation. The hero's journey model is linear in structure, cyclical, and it offers a singular solution to solving a problem, often through conflict. When it's been used by Hollywood in recent times, it's used to reinforce masculine Caucasian ideals, with people of other backgrounds often appearing in supporting roles or as motivating forces. And this model can and often is used as a means to impose or reaffirm the dominant social order. It's a storytelling model that reflects an age of living in limited information, but in the context of today, this model seems quite simplistic. And it's worth remembering that Campbell himself did believe another model would emerge at a time when our culture required it. So Jeff Gomez argues that this time is now, and that on the back of the cultural explosion of the internet and our increasing connectivity, we can see popular stories changing at a structural level to reflect the age of information abundance that we live in. This new storytelling modality, the collective journey, operates less like a simple circle and more like a massive crack of lightning. So these kinds of stories that appear can take non-linear directions, showcase a greater diversity of racial, gender and sexual orientation, creating greater agency for a greater range of people. It showcases stories with broader moral complexity and different points of view. And it features the aspects of listening and negotiating, which is a key part to people working together to create and implement systemic and lasting change. So not one person needs to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. It becomes a process of people working together in connected states to understand the strengths and abilities of each other in order to create something stronger. So these stories are not necessarily dependent on conflict. It's arguably a more mature model of social instruction, but it's also a much messier model, creating a lot more complexity. So if we have a look at the Star Wars universe itself, we can see that the original films were very much rooted in the notions of the hero's journey, and George Lucas made this very clear. But the new generations of films are becoming much more diverse and expansive, and we're seeing increased racial and gender diversity in the characters, which is offering a greater sense of social inclusion and more capacity for people to remix their own stories in what they see in this form of commercial entertainment, which is significant for a brand like Star Wars with such significant global reach. Spoilers for The Last Jedi, but in the most recent film, with the death of Luke Skywalker and his releasing of the Force to the universe, it becomes clear that, again, that anyone can become a Jedi. And so thematically, we're moving towards notions of teamwork and complex morality. Likewise, if we look at the MCU, it began as a number of hero's journey stories that were combined to make an uber hero's journey film, The Avengers. But after this experimental process of teaming up characters, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that they needed more than just white dudes to fill up their universe. So increasingly, the diversity of characters became a way to preserve the integrity of this growing fictional universe. So when taken collectively, the transmedia sprawl of the MCU franchise demands diversity to retain interest, to create variety, and to appeal to different market segments. And we can see examples of characters, particularly in more recent films, reconciling different viewpoints to work collectively in a story world where anyone can die, and spoilers, even Iron Man. So to go back to Gunn and Wendig, both their personal styles for criticising Trump were leaning into self-expression and conflict, and were therefore classic hero's journey style communications. Wendig remained defiant, but has since moved on to other high-profile projects. Wendig pointed out he's always communicated like that and didn't really indicate a sense of changing. Similarly, Gunn moved on to other projects, but he demonstrated a sense of self-analysis and attrition, and was supported by his cast of Guardians who have publicly a very diverse range of political viewpoints. Ultimately, Gunn was rehired, and while there is no doubt a huge range of commercial reasons why this was the case, and Disney chose to bring him back from Warner Brothers, it's interesting to observe his journey through a storytelling lens, in that where he, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, led a redemptive path to become one of the collective again. So from both these storytellers' stories, we can see the risks, as well as the potential opportunities for being a commercial storyteller in the modern age. Both had the opportunity to communicate in a more aspirational manner and to speak from their perspective in a way that showcased an ability to converse and interact with people around us, and not just those from the same world outlook, and in doing so to set a standard for improving civic ties. Taking this kind of approach would have allowed them to implicitly acknowledge diversity and individual agency and tap into the greater aspirational message of feeling part of a collective and part of a collective journey despite having different viewpoints. There's no guarantee that people still would not react to the sorts of viewpoints that they had, but at a culturally systemic level, there's a greater chance that their ideas would have been better received if they'd expressed them differently. So overall, we can learn from these examples the importance of taking responsibilities for the stories and communications that we put out there. So overall, I really believe that we should be optimistic for the future. Modern stories are evolving to reflect our digital lives, and as part of that, we are seeing in big franchise properties a greater capacity for spreading aspirational ideas that involve more people with the ability to impact the civic imagination in a positive way. We're seeing greater examples of people working collectively to enhance connections between each other and to draw from the skills of each other. So in terms of open literacy, storytellers and fans should remember the responsibility we have to each other, the civic ties we have as we navigate these new storytelling experiences. And it's also worth mentioning that there are significant commercial benefits for companies and corporations willing to listen and to observe the traits of this new structure. So I'm inclined to end with a question: are we moving beyond self-expression to finally to a phase of greater self-analysis? Thank you very much.